Coaching Remotely podcast presented by New England Patriots Alumni Club.
Dante Scarnecchia has had influence over players over the last 35 years, had just recently retired. Our own Chuck Wilson from Evenfield had an opportunity to sit with Dante Scarnecchia and extract from him some of that wisdom.
Talk about team culture a little bit. What builds a positive team culture? What are those attributes that you need to have with the players, with the coaches, that end up putting together a really positive environment in which you can succeed?
Oh boy. I think that, the culture of the team is driven by two things. Now, people will disagree with this and it doesn't matter, but I think you have a team. At the high end of the team, the top 5%, those are your leaders of leaders. Those are the best guys you got. But it's about 5%. They're going to do everything you want them to do. They're going to lead the team. They're going to be the best. There's a 5% at the bottom. They're not following this program no matter what. And some of them are good players. Some of these guys way up here, not the greatest players, but they're pretty good players. Some of these guys are pretty good players. Some of them aren't so good. And in between, there's 90%. Now, who are they going to gravitate to? If that top 5% has the voice, that 5% at the bottom, they got nothing, okay? And no one wants to hear what they have to say. No one's going to follow them because everybody's going to push up there. But that top 5% isn't as strong as you'd like them to be, then all of a sudden, that culture gets a little bit weighted towards the bottom and it's not as good as you'd like it to be. So however you can find that top 5% and feed them and say, hey, look at fellas, we got to make sure we get more out of them. They may be your captains, they may not. And they may be your starters, some of them may not. But they're the guys that, have their voices sound and strong, and they're usually the guys that carry it. And you got to find those guys.
What are the behaviors that you need to have in that leadership role?
So the usual great qualities we talked about. Got to show up on time. Got to be great listeners. Got to be leaders in the meeting rooms, in the weight room, on the field. I mean, it transcends everything, because you can't, if your leaders aren't willing to go in there and lift weights and work hard and help run the off-season program, especially at the lower levels in high school in the summer when no one wants to come out here. But your team leaders say, we're going to go out here, we're going to run today, we're going to throw the ball around because the coaches can't be here. Those are the guys that make your team stronger.
It's interesting. I've always thought that intentional leadership is really important. What are your intentions and what behaviors are you exhibiting that back up the principles you believe in? And Pete Brock made a really interesting point. And he said, not all leadership is intentional. And he pointed to John Hannah.
Yeah.
And he said John Hannah simply showed by how hard he worked, but he didn't really, quote unquote, try to be a leader. What are your thoughts on that?
I think Pete has it exactly right, and that really was John. I mean, when you watch John practice, all you could just say was wow, and he was his own guy. But there are those guys, that they're just pit bulls, and I think as a coach, you want to make people know and highlight those guys as much as you can. And you do it in your film session and say, take a look at this guy here on this play, fellas. And that's how we want to play right there. And that kid may never be able to say it, but as a coach, you got to let him know, hey, that's what we're looking for right here. And I think that, that's a great example of guys doing it.
Let's talk a little bit about effort and attitude. What does that mean to you as a coach?
I think it means everything, the amount of effort that's expended on every play, and if it's really high, you're never going to have a squabble with that guy. You're never going to have a disagreement with him, and it'll only make them better. And like we just said, they're guys that you can point to, say, and get a lot of guys to play like that. You're going to have a really, really good team. Attitude, you know, the right attitude. Every day I'm coming in here, I'm going to work as hard as I can work. I'm going to do everything that I've been asked to do, and try to get that attitude to radiate throughout the room and throughout the team. And, you know, usually it just makes everybody better.
You're an incredibly demanding coach over the years, and yet players responded really well because, others have said, you showed them that you cared about them, that you really wanted each of them to be able to maximize their abilities. What do you want to say to youth coaches who are trying to get the best out of their players, but they're dealing with kids?
I think that you have to look at them, especially with the young kids, and keep reinforcing the things that you want to see them do at practice, okay? And they all won't be able to do them right, especially when they're younger, but there will be some that really will do it right. And yes, and you got to show it. That's what we want. This is what we want the pitcher to look like, and this is how we want everyone to play. And you have to, when you see it, you have to keep reinforcing it and praising it. And in contrast, even at the youth level, you got to say, you know, really, that's not good enough. And because I know that's negative, but there's ways to say that's not good enough. It's not wrong. It can't be, Chuck, everything they do can't be, good job, way to go. That's
Exactly.
good. It's not always good. And you got to let them know. It's no different than parenting your kids. Boy, you were great today. I'm so proud of you. You know, you did all the stuff. And you know what? You didn't do this. You didn't do this. I know, but you got to do this.
But you're demanding of the things they control.
That's
Right?
exactly right.
That's the real key here. If you're demanding of the things they need that, because they need that kind of feedback. As long as they know that that correction is about helping them become a better player and a better contributor to the team, and isn't it about trying to call them out and embarrass them and so on.
Yeah, I agree. It's all about nurturing and fostering and building good habits. And I think that's what a coach's job is. That's what a youth coach's job is too.
Communication is huge, and I think a lot of times parents, coaches, and players don't realize the way they're communicating, even if they're not saying anything. The kind of body language, the facial expressions, that kind of thing, that gets back to sort of the positive team culture. But what are your thoughts on the way that players and the way that coaches express themselves at times?
I think the number one thing, if a young coach asked me, what's a great way to coach? I would tell them, you have to be you first. Whatever you is has been plenty good to get you to this point. And, don't try to be like that guy. That'll come, okay? You're going to be part of somebody as you go. We've all done that. And I think that the most important thing is to be yourself and try to build on the best things you do. Don't beat them up with, overkill as far as, tough coaching and all the rest of that. Tough coaching will come. They'll appreciate tough coaching if they see that it's going to make them better. That's really important to them as people, especially in the pros. When I first started coaching, in pro football, I coached the same way I did in college football. And what I learned about pro players is if they thought you could make them better, they would listen and do anything you wanted them to do, because they all want to be better. Because if they're better, they get to stay, and that's all they can ask for.
How do you help kids channel their emotions in positive ways? How can coaches, how can parents, and how can kids learn to do that? Because we even see at the professional level, sometimes the emotions that help to drive you as an athlete actually can work against you. You pick up a 15-yard penalty at just the worst time.
I think it's no different than parenting. If you see behavior that is not conducive to the things you value, or in a football context that hurts the team, you got to let them know. you got to let them know, and you got to say, and you got to tell them why, and you got to make them see it within that context, that it is, that behavior is hugely important. So I think it's all about, you know, standing up and telling them exactly how you feel.